"Don't drink that," she whispered. Why would a bruised, chubby waitress risk her life just to stop a mafia boss from lifting a single glass of wine? Her shaking hand froze midair, fingers stained with a faint smear of red from the broken skin on her wrist, gripping a silver tray that trembled so violently the crystal stemware chimed like a warning bell. The room didn't react, until the glass in front of him caught the chandelier light wrong. Like something inside it had already changed before anyone touched it. Her voice should not have carried that far. It did, and it made everything go quiet. 3 hours earlier, the mansion overlooking the lake was already breathing like a locked animal. The dining hall was prepared for power, not people. Long black table, gold-trimmed plates, wine bottles aligned with surgical precision, each label facing outward like a controlled display of obedience. She moved through it like she always did. Invisible, efficient, trained to erase herself between footsteps. The chubby waitress, bruised wrist hidden under a damp sleeve, kept her eyes on the pattern of the floor, memorizing distance instead of danger. That was how she survived here. Not by being seen, but by predicting where she would be ignored. The mother stood near the far end of the hall, smiling too perfectly, her lips lifted at an angle that didn't match her eyes. Something about it made the waitress stop for half a second longer than she should have. Not fear. Recognition. Like a signal she wasn't supposed to decode. Across the room, Mafia boss Silas Kavanaugh sat motionless in a dark tailored suit, one hand resting near a crystal glass of red wine he hadn't touched. His presence didn't fill the room, it compressed it. People didn't look at him directly for long. They adjusted themselves around his silence instead. Elena Whitmore, the hostess, spoke softly beside him, her tone polished like glass. "Everything tonight is exactly as requested," she said, smiling as if the world owed her trust. The waitress stepped forward to place the final tray, but her wrist burned, bruised skin pulling against fabric, and her eyes caught something wrong. The wine bottle on the service cart had a seal that didn't match the rest. Same label, same shape, but the wax edge was slightly uneven, as if it had been opened and closed again under pressure too careful to be careless. Her breath stopped before thought formed. She shouldn't have known that detail, but she did, because she had seen the original bottle arrive sealed. She moved one step closer to Silas before she realized she was already speaking. "Don't drink that," she whispered. The words were not loud, but they cut through everything anyway. Silas didn't reach for the glass. He didn't react like a man startled. He reacted like a man recalculating distance between himself and a possibility. His eyes shifted not to her face but to the bottle. Just once. Elena's smile did not break, but something in her gaze tightened, almost imperceptibly, like a thread pulled too hard under silk. The mother in the corner room smiled again. Same expression, same angle. And this time, the waitress noticed something worse. Her smile arrived half a second too late. And on the service cart beside the wine, a folded cloth napkin slipped slightly when no one touched it, revealing a faint black mark underneath, like a code pressed into fabric that was never meant to be seen. Silence did not break after her whisper, it thickened. The crystal glass in front of Silas Kavanaugh stayed untouched, but the air around it had already changed, like the room had started remembering something it wasn't supposed to know. No one moved for a full second. Then Elena Whitmore let out a soft, controlled laugh, the kind that never rises above elegance. "She's new," she said gently, as if correcting a child's mistake in front of guests. Nerves do strange things, but her eyes didn't leave the bottle. The waitress didn't step back. Her bruised wrist stayed hidden under the edge of her sleeve, but her fingers tightened around the silver tray until the metal pressed into her skin. She was listening not to Elena, but to the absence of sound that followed. That absence told her more than words ever could. Silas didn't touch the glass. He simply shifted it half an inch away from his reach, almost casually, as if adjusting distance rather than avoiding death. His gaze dropped to the napkin on the service cart. The folded cloth with the faint black mark was still slightly exposed. He didn't ask what it was. He only lifted his phone once, took a silent photo, and lowered it again. No reaction. No alarm. Just storage. The waitress noticed that and understood something without being told. He was already building a case in his head. In the kitchen corridor behind them, dishes clinked too loudly, a dishwasher humming like a machine pretending nothing mattered beyond its own cycle. Someone called out a table number, but the voice didn't match the schedule printed on the wall chart. She saw it clearly now. The shift log had been rewritten. Not corrected. Rewritten. Her eyes moved faster than her fear. A second keycard lay half-hidden under the service clipboard. One she had never been issued. She had never entered that corridor at that time. Yet her name was stamped beside it. "Wait," she whispered under her breath, more to herself than anyone else. Elena's assistant passed behind her with a tray of empty glasses, leaving behind a faint trail of expensive perfume. Too strong, too deliberate, like someone had walked through a scene twice to make sure it smelled like innocence. The waitress followed that scent with her eyes and saw something else. A coat hanging near the staff exit, not belonging to any server. The fabric was too clean, too untouched. Yet on the sleeve, a small hospital bracelet was tied like it had been used as a reminder, not medical identification. Silas finally spoke, voice low enough that only those closest heard. How many people handled the wine after sealing? The question was not loud, but it collapsed space. A junior staff member hesitated. Too long. That hesitation was the answer. The waitress stepped forward slightly, despite the hand of another employee trying to guide her back. "I saw the cart," she said carefully. "It was logged for one stop, but it passed 2 stations. Her voice didn't shake this time. It held. Silas didn't look at her immediately. He looked at the wall-mounted security monitor instead. Then he asked, almost quietly, "Where is corridor camera 3? A manager blinked too slowly. "It should be recording." The waitress felt it before she understood it. Something had already been removed. Not stopped. Removed. The monitor flickered once, then showed a frozen timestamp that didn't match the current time by exactly 7 minutes. 7 minutes of missing footage. 7 minutes of something that had been allowed to exist only outside observation. Elena adjusted her cuff as if the conversation bored her. "Technical issues happen in old buildings," she said softly, but her voice had changed slightly now. Not louder, sharper. Silas turned his head just enough to look at her. "Old buildings don't rewrite logs," he said. And then, for the first time, the waitress noticed something colder than fear. The realization that the shift schedule behind her name had been altered after she arrived, not before. Her own entry had been edited. At the bottom of the clipboard, her signature sat 1 line lower than it should have been, misaligned by a single inch that no one would notice unless they were already looking for lies. The room felt suddenly narrower. The waitress swallowed, eyes locked on the ink of her own name as if it didn't belong to her anymore. And then she saw it on the digital clock above the kitchen door. The seconds ticked forward, but the minutes did not match the security feed anymore. 2 systems. 2 times. One of them lying. And in that silent contradiction, the dishwasher stopped mid-cycle for exactly 1 second before restarting as if nothing had happened. The dishwasher restarted with a low mechanical sigh, but no one moved as if that sound had just rewritten the room's physics. The frozen timestamp on the security monitor still held. 7 minutes missing from existence itself, and the waitress felt it in her bones more than her eyes. Something had already happened in those 7 minutes, and the room had agreed not to remember it. A server walked past her shoulder too quickly, nearly bumping the silver tray, and in that fraction of contact she saw it. A wine order slip tucked inside the cart divider, half crumpled, with Elena Whitmore's initials printed at the bottom instead of the sommelier's. That wasn't protocol. That wasn't even possible in a properly logged service chain. The waitress pulled it free before she could think, hiding it under her palm, her bruised wrist burning as fabric rubbed against broken skin. Silas Kavanaugh's eyes shifted once toward her hand. Not the face, not the panic, just the paper. He didn't reach for it. He simply memorized it. That was worse. Elena noticed the movement immediately. Her smile softened, but only in appearance. "Accidents happen when staff are overwhelmed," she said lightly, stepping closer as if offering help. Her tone was perfect hospitality, Warm, measured, controlled. But her gaze flicked to the waitress's hand with a precision that didn't belong to kindness. You should let someone take that from you before you drop it. It wasn't advice. It was instruction. The waitress didn't release it. Instead, she unfolded the slip just enough to see the timestamp. The wine had been reassigned to the table 38 minutes earlier than the kitchen log claimed it was even selected. Her stomach tightened. That gap wasn't error. It was design. That time doesn't match the dispatch record, she said quietly, more to the air than to anyone, as if speaking too loudly might erase her from the room. A man behind Elena gave a short laugh. She's confused again, he added smoothly, not looking at her directly, only at Silas, as if correcting a misunderstanding about weather. Long shift, probably mixing things up. The waitress flinched at the dismissal but didn't step back. Instead, she pointed small, precise to the cart tag. This signature isn't mine, she said. I didn't log this transfer. Silence hit harder than sound. Silas finally moved his gaze from the monitor to the slip in her hand. Slowly, he asked, when were you assigned to this corridor? Not accusatory, not comforting, just calibration. She answered instantly. 6:42. A pause. Then she added, but I wasn't in the kitchen then. I was still in the dining hall clearing table 7. The kitchen manager's expression tightened for a fraction of a second before smoothing back into politeness. That's not what the shift log says, he replied gently, already reaching for a tablet. It shows you were. He stopped mid-sentence. His thumb swiped again. The line was gone. Not corrected. Deleted. The waitress felt her breath thin. Someone had erased her presence in real time and replaced it with a version that could be blamed. She looked at Silas. For the first time, his silence changed texture. It wasn't passive anymore. It was structural, like he was rebuilding the room in his mind piece by piece. Elena tilted her head slightly, voice still silk. If there is confusion, we can resolve it privately. No need to make the staff uncomfortable. The word uncomfortable was doing heavy work. It meant, stop speaking. But the waitress had already reached for something else, her apron pocket. Inside, folded smaller than a receipt, was a duplicate wine slip she had taken earlier without thinking, when she first noticed the seal difference. The ink on it was slightly smudged from her sweat. She placed it on the cart without ceremony. This one has my initial, she said. The other doesn't. Silas looked down at both papers side by side. Then at the timestamp discrepancy. Then finally at Elena's face. Not accusation yet. Just recognition of inconsistency building into shape. And that was when the waitress noticed it, the faint vibration in her pocket. Her old phone, thought to be off, had just lit up with a single notification. A deleted voicemail restored itself for exactly 1 second before disappearing again, showing only a timestamp that matched the missing 7-minute gap on the security feed. The phone in her pocket went dark again as quickly as it had appeared, like it had never dared interrupt the room at all. The waitress kept her hand steady over the silver cart, the folded slips of paper pressed between her fingers now damp with sweat and tension. The deleted voicemail timestamp still burned in her mind, matching the missing 7-minute gap too precisely to feel accidental. Across the room, Elena Whitmore did not raise her voice. She never needed to. Let's not turn this into a misunderstanding, she said softly, turning slightly toward the staff manager as if continuing a conversation about weather instead of truth. We have guests. Present. The word guests landed like a command disguised as etiquette. A middle-aged man in a tailored vest, floor manager, stepped forward with practiced calm. We appreciate your observation, he said to the waitress, tone controlled, professional, almost kind. But you're not assigned to audit service records. You're assigned to service. It was not an insult. It was a boundary being drawn in real time. The waitress nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement of pressure. She did not move back. She adjusted her name tag instead. Finger steady, small correction of identity in a room trying to rewrite it. Then correct the log, she said quietly, because it shows me in corridor 3 at 6:42. I was clearing table 7 at that time. The manager smiled politely, but it didn't reach his eyes. Table 7 was cleared at 6:44, he replied. According to the system. Silas Kavanaugh lifted his gaze slightly at that. Not at the waitress. At the word system, like it had just become unreliable. A server behind her shifted the cart again, too quickly, and one of the wine glasses tapped the metal edge with a thin, accidental chime. The sound felt louder than it should have been. Elena stepped closer now, still composed, her voice lowered just enough to feel personal. You look tired, she said to the waitress, almost kindly. Long shifts do strange things to memory. It's not a flaw. It's human. Then, softer. Why don't you take a break before this becomes uncomfortable for you? The word uncomfortable again, polished into a weapon. The waitress did not respond immediately. Instead, she placed both slips of paper on the cart, side by side, aligning them with careful precision. These are not the same log, she said. One was edited after the fact. The manager exhaled through his nose, a small smile appearing as if he had already decided how this would end. That's a serious claim, he said gently, and one we would need you to sign in an incident report before continuing. He slid a tablet toward her, screen already open to a pre-written statement. The language was clean, sterile, careful. It described confusion, misinterpretation, stress, not owning, just human error, a rewrite waiting for approval. The waitress didn't touch it. Her bruised wrist hovered above the screen for a second, then pulled back. I'm not signing that, she said. Not loudly, not defiantly, simply final. Behind her, one of the guests shifted in his chair, whispering something about staff misunderstanding. As if truth were a scheduling issue, Elena let out a small, controlled sigh. We're trying to help you, she said, voice still warm, but now edged. This environment is not kind to mistakes. Silas finally moved. Not forward, just slightly to the side, enough to see the cart, the slips, the tablet, and the waitress without obstruction. His eyes narrowed, not in judgment but in calculation. Something in the way the room was correcting itself around her did not align with what he had already observed. The difference was subtle, too practiced, too synchronized. The waitress noticed it too. Not in him, in them. Every correction pointed in one direction. Away from her, away from contradiction, toward closure. She tightened her grip on the edge of the cart. Then show me the original log, she said. A pause. The manager's smile flickered for half a second too long before resetting. The original log was overwritten during system synchronization, he replied smoothly. Too smoothly. Too fast. Silas's gaze shifted immediately to him. Not sharp, just still. That stillness was worse than interruption, because it meant he had noticed the speed of the answer. And in that same breath of silence, the printer behind the service station suddenly activated on its own, spitting out a fresh service sheet with one line misaligned at the bottom. Table 7 was now listed as cleared at 6:41, not 6:44, contradicting the manager's statement by exactly 3 minutes no one had just explained. The printer's final page still vibrated faintly in the tray, as if the machine itself regretted what it had just produced. Table 7, 6:41. A timestamp that contradicted every spoken correction in the room. The silence that followed was not empty anymore. It was dense, layered, almost physical. The waitress moved first, not away from it, toward it. Her bruised wrist brushed the edge of the service cart as she reached beneath the lower tray lining, fingers searching with controlled urgency. She had hidden it there earlier without thinking she would ever need it in front of them like this. The old restaurant-issued phone, scratched, half-charged, screen dimmed with age. She placed it on the cart between the printed logs like it belonged there more than anything else in the room. This device was synced to the service system, she said quietly. It stores manual override timestamps. A few heads turned now. Not fully. Not yet. But enough. Elena Whitmore's gaze dropped to the phone, then rose again slowly. Her expression did not crack. Instead, it softened into something almost sympathetic. That phone is obsolete, she said gently, like correcting a child holding broken glass. It hasn't been connected to the network in months. The waitress didn't answer immediately. Her fingers pressed lightly against the edge of the screen. It still records local logs, she said, even without network sync. Silas Kavanaugh's eyes shifted for the first time from the printed sheet to the device. The silence around him tightened. He didn't touch it yet. He just looked at it the way he looked at things that might change the shape of a room if confirmed. The manager stepped forward again, carefully, voice controlled. If she is suggesting system corruption, we can escalate through proper audit channels, he said. But this, he gestured lightly at the phone, is not verified equipment. A pause. Too quick. Too rehearsed. The waitress unlocked the phone. The screen flickered, struggling, then opened to a single saved file. A time-stamped audio clip. She did not play it. She only turned the screen enough for Silas to see the metadata. 6:39. Corridor 3. 2 minutes before the official system log claimed she was even present there. Silas finally reached out. Not for the phone. For the printed sheet beside it. He compared both timestamps without speaking. The room seemed to lean inward with him. Elena let out a soft breath, almost amused. Even if there was a discrepancy, she said, voice still velvet smooth, it would only suggest clerical inconsistency, not intent. But something in her phrasing shifted slightly on the word intent. The waitress noticed it. Silas noticed it too. He set the paper down slowly. Clerical inconsistency doesn't erase 7 minutes of missing footage, he said. Not as accusation, as confirmation of pattern. The manager's jaw tightened for the first time. Security systems glitch during high-volume service cycles, he replied. We've already explained. Silas cut him off with a single glance. No words, just the absence of permission to continue. The manager stopped mid-sentence. The silence returned heavier than before. The waitress took the phone back into her hand, holding it tighter now, as if it weighed more than it should. I didn't leave my station at 6:42, she said again, slower this time, because I was already in corridor 3 at 6:39. She tapped the screen once. And someone else was there before me. A faint hesitation spread through the staff line behind her. Not fear. Adjustment. Like they were recalculating which version of events they were allowed to believe. Elena stepped slightly closer to Silas now, voice lowering into something more intimate. You're letting an unverified narrative shape a serious misunderstanding, she said. We can resolve this privately as we always do. The phrase always do hung in the air a fraction too long. Silas didn't look at her when he responded. Always, he repeated quietly, as if testing the word against memory. Then his gaze shifted, not to the waitress anymore, but to Elena's assistant standing near the service corridor. The assistant's hand tightened around a tablet for half a second too long before relaxing again. That was enough. Silas didn't say it out loud, but something in his expression changed. A recognition forming not of truth yet, but of a pattern of control too consistent to be accidental. And the waitress, still holding the old phone, saw it happen in real time. The first moment the room stopped belonging entirely to Elena Whitmore, when the man she thought was not yet convinced began to look at her as if she had already spoken one truth too many. The old phone stayed in the waitress's hand longer than it should have, its screen dimming and waking again like it couldn't decide whether the truth deserved to stay alive. Silas Kavanaugh didn't move toward it anymore. He didn't need to. He had already stopped reacting like a guest and started reacting like a system breaking its own rules. His phone lay flat on the table now, face down, untouched, but his attention was elsewhere. Locked on Elena Whitmore's assistant, who suddenly seemed less like background and more like infrastructure. The assistant adjusted her posture too quickly when Silas looked at her. That was all it took. No words, just recognition. The waitress stood still beside the service cart, fingers still wrapped around the old device, but her voice came out quieter now, steadier. I don't want compensation, she said. I want my record corrected. A pause. And I want my mother's hospital account released from the hold. The words didn't sound like pleading. They sounded like documentation of something already wrong for too long. Elena let out a soft laugh again, but it was thinner now, like the edge of control being tested. "This is a service dispute," she said gently. "Not a financial negotiation." The waitress didn't look at her. "It's not about money," she replied. "It's about my name not being changed in your system when I was never in that corridor." Outside the glass walls of the dining hall, rain began tapping lightly against the windows, steady and indifferent. Inside, the sound of a dishwasher restarting in the far kitchen filled the gaps between words. A spoon hit a ceramic plate somewhere behind the staff line. Small, normal, almost comforting. But it made the silence feel more artificial, like the room was pretending to breathe. Silas finally lifted his hand, not to silence anyone, but to signal something far more controlled. A man in a dark suit stepped forward from the corridor entrance. Lawyer, not security. He didn't announce himself. He simply placed a tablet on the table beside Silas. "We can retrieve archived authentication logs from secondary servers," the lawyer said calmly, eyes scanning the situation like a slow inventory. "If access was altered after synchronization, it will leave trace residue." Elena's smile tightened for the first time. "Not gone. Adjusted. You're escalating a misunderstanding based on a waitress's emotional interpretation," she said softly, voice still elegant, still composed. "That is not how governance works here." The waitress finally looked at her. Not angry, not afraid, just present. "Then show me the unedited log," she said. "Not the corrected one." Her bruised wrist shifted slightly as she lowered the old phone onto the cart, as if placing it there meant she was done protecting it with her body alone. Silas's eyes followed that motion. Not the phone itself, but the decision behind it. Something in him recalculated. He didn't speak for a moment. When he finally did, it was to his lawyer, not the room. "Pull the last 7 days of corridor access," he said. "Not the summary, the raw entry data." The lawyer nodded once and moved away. Elena's assistant took a half step back, too subtle to be noticed by most, too precise to be accidental. The waitress exhaled slowly, but she didn't relax. She knew better than to trust silence in rooms like this. Silence here always meant something was being moved, not something had ended. A notification vibrated faintly on Silas's phone, still face down. He turned it over for the first time. The screen lit briefly, showing a flagged internal audit file from his own organization. He didn't open it immediately. He just stared at the label. Corridor 3, Access Anomaly Report. His eyes didn't change much, but something behind them did. He looked up slowly, not at the waitress this time, not at the logs, but at Elena Whitmore, really looked at her. And for the first time, the thought formed clearly enough to stay. Someone inside his trusted circle had been shaping what he was allowed to see for a very long time, and he had only just noticed the edge of it because a waitress with bruised wrists refused to change her story. Silas Kavanaugh didn't raise his voice when the audit file finished loading. He didn't react at all at first. The screen glow reflected in his eyes like something cold settling into place. Not anger but alignment. Pieces locking into a shape that had already existed, just hidden. The lawyer stood beside him, waiting. The waitress stayed near the service cart, still holding her bruised wrist slightly away from her body, as if protecting something that had already been taken once. "Stop all discretionary corrections," Silas said quietly. The lawyer didn't ask what that meant. He simply nodded and stepped away, already typing. Elena Whitmore remained where she was, composed, hands folded lightly in front of her like nothing in the room had shifted weight. But her stillness now had edges. Silas finally looked up at her directly. "We're going to reconstruct the corridor sequence," he said. "Not a question, not a challenge, a fact." A few guests shifted in their seats, sensing the air tighten. Elena tilted her head slightly. "Reconstruct?" she repeated, polite, almost amused. "This is a private dinner, not a deposition." Silas didn't respond to the tone. He only gestured once toward the staff corridor camera feed projected onto the side monitor. "Play Corridor 3 from 6:35 to 6:50. The screen flickered. The footage appeared, but with a faint digital stutter at exactly the same missing 7-minute interval. a gap that refused to exist cleanly. The waitress stepped forward before she realized she had moved. "That's not right," she said softly. At 6:39 I entered from the left service door, not the kitchen corridor. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was precise. Elena's assistant turned slightly too quickly at that statement. Silas noticed. He didn't comment. Instead, he turned to the manager. "Where is the physical access log for the corridor keypad?" The manager hesitated just long enough to be visible. "It's integrated into the central system," he said. "We already showed—" "No," Silas interrupted, still calm. "The backup mechanical log, not the integrated one." A pause. "The kind that exposes what people assume will never be asked for." The lawyer returned with a thin file and placed it on the table. Silas opened it slowly. The waitress leaned in slightly, not to read everything, just enough to confirm one thing she remembered without realizing she had memorized. The timestamp font was slightly different on one entry. A single line had been rewritten using a different template format. "This entry was reprinted," she said before anyone asked her to speak. All eyes shifted to her briefly. She didn't flinch. "The ink density is different," she added. "It's not from the same batch printer cycle." Elena's smile didn't vanish. It narrowed. "You're analyzing stationery now?" she asked gently. "That's impressive for someone on service duty." But Silas didn't look at Elena anymore. He looked at the file, then the monitor, then the assistant standing 2 steps behind Elena. "Let's walk it," he said. "Exactly as recorded." The room didn't move for a second. Then he added, quieter, "Every person follows their logged position at 6:39. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a reset of reality. Staff began to shift into place reluctantly, replaying positions under silent pressure. The waitress stayed where she was for half a second longer, then moved, not where the log said she should be, but where she actually had been. Silas noticed that immediately. Not corrected. Confirmed. Elena adjusted her posture again, just slightly. "This is unnecessary," she said. "You're disrupting guests over a clerical discrepancy." Silas finally turned to her fully. "Then repeat your route from 6:38, he said. "Without the log." The request wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Elena blinked once. Just once. Then smiled again. "Of course," she said. "I went from the dining hall to the corridor to supervise service continuity." "Through which door?" Silas asked. "A beat. The main service entry," she replied. The waitress's head tilted slightly. A detail surfaced in her memory, uninvited but sharp. Elena had not used that door. She had seen her near the kitchen divider instead. She spoke before thinking. "You used the side access," she said quietly. "Not the main entry. I saw your coat pass the stainless divider before the bottle was swapped." Silence dropped instantly. Elena's eyes flicked toward her, just a fraction sharper now. "You're mistaken," she said softly. But Silas didn't look at the waitress. He looked at Elena's assistant again. Then he spoke one sentence that changed the temperature of the room. "She remembers correctly," he said. Not loud, not dramatic, absolute. And in that moment, Elena understood something she hadn't expected this early. The waitress was no longer speaking alone. The reconstructed walk stopped without warning, as if the room itself had run out of patience for pretending. Every staff member froze in the positions they were told to occupy, but nothing about it felt like obedience anymore. It felt like exposure. The monitor on the wall flickered, then stabilized into a deeper feed, one that hadn't been shown before. Silas Kavanaugh didn't look at anyone when it appeared. He only looked at the timeline stamp in the corner of the screen. 6:39. Then a second file loaded beneath it. Raw corridor audio. Not synchronized. Not cleaned. The waitress felt her fingers tighten around the old phone in her hand before she even realized she was still holding it. "Play it," Silas said quietly. No one moved to comply fast enough, so the lawyer did. The sound came through the room like something reopening. Footsteps in corridor 3, a cart rolling too smoothly, then a voice, Elena Whitmore's voice, but not the version she had used in the dining hall. This one was lower, direct, unfiltered. "Make sure the second bottle is the one delivered," it said. A pause. "Not the sealed one." The silence that followed was immediate and total. Elena didn't react outwardly. She simply stopped blinking for a fraction too long. The manager behind her shifted his weight as if suddenly unsure where the floor had gone. Silas didn't look at Elena yet. He looked at the assistant. "You routed the replacement?" he asked. The assistant's mouth opened, then closed. "It was standard procedure," she said quickly, but her voice had already lost its structure. The waitress stepped forward, holding the old phone higher now, not as a weapon but as proof she had refused to let disappear. "There's a backup recording," she said, "from before the system reset." Her thumb pressed the screen. A second file opened, voice memo, timestamped just before the 7-minute gap. Her own voice was in it, softer, earlier, uncertain. "This doesn't match the seal. Someone changed the bottle after dispatch." She stopped it there. She didn't need to play more. Silas heard enough. For the first time, he leaned back slightly, not in relaxation but in recognition of scale. His eyes shifted to Elena slowly, like something heavy had finally found its final position. "You authorized a reroute through Corridor 3, he said. Not a question. Elena exhaled once, controlled. "I authorized a contingency adjustment for service efficiency," she replied, still polished, still intact. But now every word sounded like it was being spoken over a fracture. The waitress didn't move closer to Silas. She didn't need to. She simply said, "That's not what the system shows." And she was right, because on the monitor, a new layer of audit data had appeared. Internal authorization logs, color-coded, time-stamped, and unmistakable. Elena's digital signature sat at the center of the override chain. Not implied, not interpreted, direct. Silas stared at it for a long moment. No reaction came first. Then something subtle changed in his face. Not anger, not shock, but the quiet violence of realization settling into place after too much delay. He remembered now. Meetings where Elena had handled logistics. Reports he never personally verified. Adjustments that had always arrived already resolved. His gaze dropped once to the waitress. Just once. And in that single glance, the shift completed. She had not been noise in the system. She had been the only unaltered signal inside it. Elena finally spoke, softer now, careful again. "Silas, this is being taken out of proportion." He raised one hand slightly. Not to silence her. To stop time from continuing under false instruction. The room obeyed without sound. He looked at the lawyer, then at the logs, then at the old phone still in the waitress's hand. And when he finally spoke, his voice was almost calm enough to be mistaken for absence of emotion. "Call my attorney." The room didn't feel like a room anymore after Silas said those words. It felt like a system finally acknowledging it had been lying to itself. His attorney was already on a secure call, voice low, controlled, asking for full audit escalation, internal freeze on all discretionary overrides, and immediate preservation of corridor-level security archives. No one interrupted him, not even Elena Whitmore. She stood perfectly still, but the illusion of control had started to thin around her edges like fabric under pressure. The waitress didn't move at first. Her old phone was still in her hand, but her grip had loosened slightly. Not from relief, but from something heavier. Confirmation. Silas finally turned to her, not as a guest looking at staff, as someone recalculating where truth had been sitting the entire time. "What's your name?" he asked. The question wasn't soft. It was precise. "Lauren," she said. A pause. Then, steadier, "Lauren Hayes." He repeated it once, quietly, as if verifying it against something internal. Then he nodded. "Stay here." It wasn't a request. It wasn't an order for control. It was protection in its most minimal form. Space being created around her for the first time in that entire room. Elena finally spoke again, voice still elegant, but now carrying strain beneath it. "Silas, You are making a structural decision based on incomplete interpretation of a service-level anomaly. She said it like law. Like language could still fix what was already breaking. Silas didn't look at her immediately. He looked at the logs still displayed on the monitor. Then he said, "Nothing incomplete has 7 minutes missing from 3 systems at once." The silence that followed was heavier than before, because now it wasn't suspicion. It was consequence beginning to assemble itself. The lawyer's voice came through the speaker quietly. "We've confirmed secondary server mismatch. Corridor 3 override originated from executive authorization layer." A pause.
Signature vérified.
The waitress, Lauren, didn't react like someone who had won anything. She only exhaled once, slow, as if her body had been holding breath for hours without permission. Her fingers touched the edge of the service card again, instinctively checking that something real still existed. That was when Silas noticed it, the apron folded under the lower shelf of the cart. Torn slightly at the seam, still stained faintly from earlier shifts, invisible until light hit it correctly. He reached for it, without asking, not to take it, to look. The fabric was ordinary, cheap cotton, the kind that absorbed everything and gave nothing back. "This belongs to you?" he asked. Lauren hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Elena's assistant shifted again, but this time no one followed her movement. Silas unfolded the apron fully. Inside the stitching near the tag was a small patch of mismatched thread where a name had been removed and resewn. Not replaced, erased. Silas looked at it longer than anything else in the room. Then he said quietly, "Someone removed your identity from their system and thought it wouldn't leave a trace." He didn't look at Elena when he said it. He didn't need to anymore. The lawyer returned to audio. "Internal review confirms unauthorized rewrite occurred post-access window. All modifications traceable to executive layer permissions." A beat. "We can isolate contributors within the hour." That was when the shift happened. Not loud, not dramatic, but irreversible. Elena finally stopped trying to sound composed. "You are dismantling months of operational coordination over one waitress's misread timestamp," she said. And now the polish was cracking in small, visible fractures. Silas finally looked at her directly. "No," he said. "I'm correcting what you convinced me not to see." The waitress didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her old phone vibrated once in her hand, weak battery warning flashing across the cracked screen. But it stayed on, and that was enough. Silas stepped closer to her, not crowding, not dominating, just present. "Your name stays in the record," he said, "correctly, permanently." Then, after a pause, "And no one edits it again." Elena didn't respond immediately, because now even her silence had lost authority. The attorney's voice returned one last time through the speaker. "We've frozen all accounts tied to Whitmore Executive Authority pending full review." That was the moment Elena finally looked like someone standing on a floor that had stopped existing. Lauren didn't smile. She only placed the apron carefully back on the cart, smoothing it once with her palm as if making sure it remembered its shape. The room didn't celebrate, just stopped lying. And for the first time, when Silas looked at her, he wasn't seeing someone who had spoken too late. He was seeing someone who had never been wrong to begin with.